doing this live, talking a little bit about my deep freezer. Um, I basically live totally off grid. If you don't follow my channel, and I live totally off grid solar, and I have a deep freezer, a regular AC freezer, running off grid as well. Been running off grid for the last 5 6 months. When I got it, I think maybe about 5 6 months. Um, so basically, I've noticed, I noticed in the last week or so, right? For some reason, the freezer was kind of running a little more than usual. And when I was waking up in the morning, or like maybe 4 in the morning, five, about four, I was noticing that the batteries were already at about 50%, which really isn't a problem. You know what I mean? I mean, I have a pretty substantial size battery bank. I have seven deep cycle batteries running in parallel, so about I have about 600 amp hours. But anyways, um, so I was thinking, okay, well, it could be the heat. I live in Puerto Rico. Maybe the heat. Also, the freezer itself had less food than before. So I was thinking, okay, maybe it's because of the fact that there's less food in the freezer at this present time. So, you know, it's losing it's losing the coldness, right? So then it hit me yesterday. I said, well, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go to the store. I'm gonna buy 2 bags of ice. They're 5 pound bags, I believe, and I'm gonna put them in the freezer to keep them there, 24/7. Because in my thought pattern, I was thinking, okay, well maybe if the inside of the freezer stays cold, in the bags of ice, the compressor will run less, right? And therefore, will not use up that much power. That was my theory, you know. And well, anyway, so I bought the bags of ice and I put them in the freezer. But the day before I bought the bags of ice, I actually did a test on my freezer. I tested how long the freezer runs and how long it turns off. So generally speaking, freezers run about 80 to 90% of the time, you know. In my particular case, my freezer runs 40 minutes and then it stops for another 20 something minutes, and then so every half hour approximately it turns on and runs 40 minutes, you know. Um, so then, as I looked up in Google, I noticed, okay, the generally, freezers run from 80 to 90% of the time, so that's about right. Mine runs about a good 80% of the time, 80, 85, whatever. So I put these 2 bags of ice in the freezer yesterday, early, you know, and I'm thinking, okay, this should work. And yesterday I made sure that I got a really good charge. So I turned on the generator yesterday to make sure my batteries were topped off early. And since they were topped off early, what happens is my batteries ended up going into the whole equalization mode. So I know I got a really awesome charge yesterday, in particular, in preparation for this test. So I buy the 2 bags of ice. I put them in the freezer, and lo and behold, I wake up at 4 in the morning, and guess what? The voltage was at 12.0, back to about 50%. So I know that that voltage on lead acid batteries, like the ones I have, flooded lead acid batteries, voltage is not the most accurate. So maybe I had a significant voltage sag, but not necessarily that my batteries were at 50%. But the test still gave me the evidence, right, that the compressor still kicks in at the same time. you know 40 minutes, same thing. So, did it work? Is the question. Did adding bags of ice in the freezer work? Well, I believe it worked and it didn't work. I believe that it worked in the sense that if there is a situation where the batteries die, then it'll work because it'll maintain the food cold. So in that aspect, it works. It's kind of like a backup plan. Now, in terms of the voltage sag, it didn't work in the sense that the compressor still came on at the same time. That didn't change. And the voltage sag was the same after putting the bags of ice and not putting the bags of ice. So, did what does this test confirm? Well, it confirms that it seems like deep freezers really don't care so much about the coldness within the freezer, but rather the cold that is leaving through the outside walls. So I guess that the freezer and the compressor and the whatever circuitry goes on in a freezer will detect the temperature on the exterior of the freezer, not so much as the one in the interior. That's why you're getting, you get the compressor turning on the same amount of time, you know, therefore kind of wasting the same amount of energy. That is my assessment. Um, would I recommend would I recommend putting a bags of ice in the freezer? Why not? I mean, it wouldn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. The bag is going to be there. If you ever need ice, it's there. If you ever have a situation where I don't know, your inverter goes bad or the batteries die out, at least it gives you a buffer. So maybe, if it happens in the middle of the night and you don't notice till the morning, well, your food won't spoil because you have these bags of ice in there, keeping it there. I actually started looking at these bags of ice more so as if they were a battery, because I figure, okay, these bags of ice are there. They are receiving the charge of the day. They're maintaining themselves cold, and it's kind of like having a cold battery within your freezer, you know. Um, but like I said, I am merely judging. I have not. I didn't do a specific gravity test on this type of test. I was merely going by the voltage. Now, my wiring is fine, because a lot of times when you have deficient wiring or wires that are too thin, in my case, that is not an issue. It's just that lead acid batteries do have a significant voltage sag when you have an appliance. Add to that these batteries are about 6 years old and they're still going strong. So yeah, there should be a little bit of reduction in terms of their, of their strength. So maybe that's why I'm getting a little bit more of a less, a little more of a voltage sag, and now when I wake up in the morning at today was like at 4 in the morning. It was actually at 11.9 with the freezer running. Okay, 11.9 with the load on is actually about a volt or 2 volts, lower than what the actual resting voltage of the battery is. So when I wake up in the morning, I see 11.9. I'm thinking, okay, 11.9 with the load on. Once the freezer kicks off, it'll jump back to 12.1, which it did. So, I'm fine with seeing the 11.9, which I wasn't seeing before. But then again, it might be just because of usage and the batteries are a little on the older side already. But they're in really really great shape, And 12.0 is 50%, which is the recommended usage of a battery. So once in the morning, once the sun comes out, at 12, I mean, at let's say around 6:37 when the sun comes out, all of a sudden I see the voltage go up clearly because the solar panels are providing power. So I'm not worried about that threshold of at 5 in the morning, 4:35 in the morning, seeing 11.9 or 12.0. I don't have an issue with that, but I really did think that putting 2 bags of ice inside of the freezer was going to make the compressor run less often, and that is, at least in my test, that was not the case. Now, that being said, I didn't time the compressor after adding the bags of ice. So maybe it did run a little bit less. Maybe it did. Maybe internally in the battery, in terms of the charge, the state of charge, maybe it did something. Maybe it did run a little bit less. But not anything significant that I could notice. So, to make a long story short, it doesn't hurt to put, the bags of ice in there. It might be beneficial. But at the same time, I really don't see there being a big benefit. If there is a benefit, I would think I would say it's more of a marginal. Now, the benefit would be that adding that additional cold or constancy of cold will actually help preserve your food better. So, in that aspect, I would recommend doing it. I mean, you buy 2 bags of ice, you have them there, and you never know, in an emergency, you have ice. You have 2 bags of ice. The bag of ice is never going to go bad. You just have it there inside of the freezer. Um, I live with my wife, just her, me and her. So we have the chest freezer, which is 5 cubic foot, and yet that's a lot of space so we have a lot of space. Even when we buy a lot of frozen foods, there's still a lot of empty space within the freezer itself. Um, so I think the 2 bags of ice it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea. It's a one-time investment, because you buy the bag of ice and you just leave it in the freezer. It's not gonna spoil. So that's it. That's pretty much it, guys. But that's my recommendation. But yeah, my freezer is running 100% off solar, and that's how we do it here. We run it 24/7. I don't disconnect the freezer ever. And we run off of solar. Been doing that. So I got this is a regular. I'm gonna show you the freezer that I have. Regular 5 cubic foot brand Frigidaire freezer. Runs at, I think, 115 volts at 1.4 or 1.5 amps. So if you do the calculation, calculation in 12, for a 12-volt system, 1.5 amps would actually be multiplied by 12, which would be about 15 amps. Now, does this draw 15 amps from my batteries? No, it does not. Generally, in the 40 minutes that it runs, I've checked with my meters, and it actually just pulls like at max, I've seen it 8 amps. So it fluctuates between 7 and 8 amps. So that's pretty much what this uses. It's a really good chest freezer. I don't recommend people buying 12-volt chest freezers because they cost you about $1,000, and it's really not worth it. Honestly, it's not worth it. You know, um, with what you save in buying a regular chest freezer, you can just buy extra solar panels, and you still have a lot of money left over. This freezer cost me about 200 and something dollars, whereas a 12-volt dedicated deep freezer of this same size, would be from 800 to 1,000. It's really not worth it. Chest freezers, they're Energy Star. Mind you, I am running this off of a 12-volt system, and which is not as efficient as a higher voltage system, and I'm using a modified sine wave. So I have two big no-nos, and yet it's working perfectly for me. So yeah, save your money, get a regular chest freezer. If you're worried about it wasting a little bit more than what then you just buy an extra panel, and you call it a day. But it works. So to recap, you're not going to see a big difference if you buy the 2 bags of ice. I would recommend doing so anyway. I mean, what do you lose? Nothing. You buy a bag of ice, you have ice. And in an emergency situation, it might protect your food. But in terms of power usage, seems like the compressor is just going to run whatever time it feels like running, which is kind of the same. So those are my tests, guys. Take it into account, because I see a lot of people running freezers on solar, and they disconnect them at night, and you know, freezers run about 80% of the time, you know, and they don't waste that much, you know. So that's it, guys. Hope you like this video.